Pyongyang, North Korea, June 8, 2026, Monday morning. Xi Jinping's Air China jet touches down at Pyongyang's Sunan International Airport. Kim Jong Un and his wife Ri Sol-ju are waiting on the tarmac. A military band plays. Children wave flags. The streets of the capital have been lined with portraits of Xi and the flags of both nations. This is Xi's first overseas trip of 2026. Not Washington, not Brussels, not Moscow, not any of the G20 capitals, not any European ally, not any Southeast Asian partner. Pyongyang, the first country Xi Jinping chose to visit in the most geopolitically volatile year of his entire presidency, is the most isolated, most sanctioned, most nuclear-armed rogue state on Earth. That choice is not ceremonial. It is not sentimental. It is a precise, deliberate, strategic signal, directed at three audiences simultaneously: Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and Kim Jong Un himself. My name is James Landon. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to explain what Xi actually went to Pyongyang to do, why the most important thing about this summit is what was never said out loud, and what this visit tells us about where the North Korean nuclear problem is actually heading, and who is now in control of it. To understand why June 8, 2026 matters, you need to understand what has happened in North Korea over the last 2 years, because most Western coverage has missed the structural shift that made this summit necessary. In June 2024, Vladimir Putin flew to Pyongyang and signed a comprehensive strategic partnership with Kim Jong Un. The treaty, Russia's only formal military alliance outside the former Soviet space, committed Moscow to defend North Korea if it was attacked. Putin, in return, received something he needed desperately: North Korean artillery shells, ballistic missiles, and eventually troops deployed to fight in Ukraine. North Korea sent an estimated 12,000 soldiers to Russia's war. It supplied over 3 million artillery shells. It received, in return, Russian satellite technology, submarine propulsion systems, and a level of military technical cooperation that North Korea's weapons program had never previously accessed. And Russia did something else that mattered enormously. Russia publicly described North Korea's nuclear weapons program as a guarantee of prosperity. Not a threat to be eliminated, not a problem to be managed, a guarantee of prosperity. Beijing watched all of this with what one analyst called quiet alarm. Here is why. For 30 years, China's position on North Korea's nuclear program has been formally consistent. The Korean peninsula should be denuclearized. Beijing supported, at least on paper, the sanctions architecture that the UN Security Council built to pressure Pyongyang into negotiations. It was China's leverage over North Korea's economy, its role as the supplier of roughly 90% of North Korea's fuel and most of its food, that gave it the influence it needed to be taken seriously in any diplomatic framework. That leverage is eroding. Because North Korea no longer needs China the way it once did. It has Russia. It has Russian technology. It has Russian diplomatic cover. It has a strategic partner that explicitly endorses its nuclear status. And as North Korea's dependence on China decreases, China's ability to shape North Korean behavior decreases with it. Xi went to Pyongyang to stop that erosion, or at least to slow it. Now, let me tell you what happened at the summit, and what didn't happen, because the gap between the two is where the real story lives. Xi and Kim met at the Kumsusan guest house. The official Chinese readout described the discussions as covering economics, trade, agriculture, science, technology, and military exchanges. Xi called for close strategic communication and pledged what Chinese state media described as unconditional support for North Korea's interests. He said China would remain committed to safeguarding shared interest with North Korea regardless of changes in the international environment. Regardless of changes in the international environment is diplomatic language for even if Washington pressures us to distance ourselves from you, we won't. The two leaders also signed a memorandum of understanding that analysts believe is aimed at reviving a multilateral dialogue framework, something resembling the six-party talks that collapsed in 2007, potentially integrating both China and the United States into a new negotiating structure around Korean Peninsula security. And then there is the thing that was not said. Xi Jinping did not mention denuclearization. Not once. Not in the official readout. Not in his public statements. Not in the banquet speech. Not in the tree planting ceremony on day 2. The word that has been the formal cornerstone of every Chinese diplomatic statement on North Korea for 30 years, was absent. A Beijing analyst named Wu Qiang said it plainly. Beijing and Pyongyang spoke warmly of friendship while leaving the issue of denuclearization untouched, effectively acquiescing to North Korea's nuclear status. The Korea Herald reported the assessment of Professor Yang Mu-jin even more directly. Kim was seeking China's endorsement of North Korea as a nuclear weapons state, and he got it through China's silence. Let that land for a moment. China, the country that for 3 decades publicly supported the goal of a denuclearized Korean peninsula, just hosted a full state summit with the leader of North Korea, signed agreements strengthening bilateral ties, pledged unconditional support, and never once mentioned the nuclear weapons that North Korea now openly displays, expands, and describes as non-negotiable. That silence is a policy shift. It may not be officially declared as such. Beijing will deny it is changing its position. But in diplomacy, what is not said is as significant as what is said. And what was not said in Pyongyang on June 8, 2026, tells you exactly where China's priorities sit right now. There are 3 reasons Beijing made this shift, and understanding all 3 is essential to understanding where this is going. The first reason is Russia. Russia has already accepted North Korea's nuclear status. If China continues to formally push for denuclearization while Russia endorses nuclearization, China positions itself as the bad cop in a triangle where Russia is the good cop. North Korea, which now has options, will naturally tilt toward its more permissive patron. By dropping the denuclearization language, China removes the wedge that Russia had been using to pull Pyongyang away from Beijing. The second reason is Trump. Trump has a history with Kim Jong Un. In 2018 and 2019, the two leaders held 3 direct summits. There are credible reports that Trump's inner circle has been exploring whether a 4th Trump-Kim meeting is possible in 2026. From Beijing's perspective, a direct Trump-Kim deal, struck without Chinese involvement, would be the worst possible outcome. It would sideline China from Korean Peninsula diplomacy entirely. Xi's visit to Pyongyang is partly a preemptive move, establishing that any diplomatic process involving North Korea runs through Beijing, not around it. The AEI analysis published today noted that the Memorandum of Understanding signed at the summit appears aimed at reviving a 6-party-style framework, one that explicitly includes China as a central participant, not a spectator. The third reason is North Korea's nuclear expansion itself. One day before Xi's plane landed in Pyongyang, North Korean state media released images of a new uranium enrichment facility. Kim Jong Un visited a plant that manufactures weapons-grade nuclear material and stated publicly that Pyongyang plans to, and I'm quoting, beef up our state's nuclear forces at an exponential rate. North Korea is not moving toward denuclearization. It is accelerating in the opposite direction. Continuing to formally demand denuclearization as a precondition for any engagement means continuing to have no engagement at all, which means having no influence over what Kim actually does. China has made a pragmatic calculation. A North Korea inside China's strategic orbit is more manageable than a North Korea operating exclusively within Russia's orbit, regardless of how many nuclear weapons it has. Now, let me give you the implications. Because this summit, which most coverage is treating as a routine diplomatic visit, has consequences that extend well beyond the Korean Peninsula. First implication: the nuclear non-proliferation framework just took another serious blow. The global nuclear non-proliferation regime, built on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, reinforced by decades of UN Security Council resolutions, operates on the assumption that nuclear weapons possession by non-declared states is illegitimate and must be reversed. China's silence on North Korean denuclearization weakens that assumption in a measurable way. If the country that has the most leverage over North Korea's economy has decided not to push for denuclearization, the international pressure architecture loses one of its two most important pillars. The other pillar, American pressure, is itself uncertain under a Trump administration that is simultaneously managing a war with Iran and exploring direct dialogue with Kim. Second implication: South Korea is now reassessing everything. Seoul has watched China describe itself as a partner in Korean Peninsula stability for decades. That partnership was premised on the assumption that Beijing shared the goal of a denuclearized peninsula. If that shared goal no longer exists, if China has effectively accepted North Korea as a nuclear state, South Korea's strategic calculus changes fundamentally. The Korea Herald quoted experts saying South Korea will reassess China's strategic value as a partner, which means Seoul may accelerate its own defense cooperation with Washington, Japan, and potentially further its own nuclear conversations, a process that has been occurring quietly for years. Third implication: this is Xi's leverage over Trump. Here is the move that most analysts are not connecting explicitly enough. Xi chose Pyongyang as his first overseas visit of 2026. He did this before any Trump-Xi summit, which is expected later this month or in July. He went to Pyongyang, pledged unconditional support, signed agreements, and walked away with Kim's reaffirmed loyalty. He is now in a position to go to Trump and say, if you want North Korea at the negotiating table, you need China in the room. If you want to control what Kim does with those nuclear weapons, you need Beijing's cooperation. The price of that cooperation is a broader conversation about Taiwan, trade, and the South China Sea. Xi used a two-day visit to a sanctioned rogue state to generate leverage in a conversation with the most powerful country on Earth. That is not a sentimental friendship visit. That is a masterclass in coercive diplomacy. Here is the frame I want to leave you with. The North Korean nuclear problem has been the defining, unresolved challenge of Asian security for 30 years. Every framework built to address it has failed. The agreed framework collapsed in 2002. The six-party talks collapsed in 2007. The Trump-Kim summits produced no agreement. The sanctions architecture has not stopped North Korea from building more and better nuclear weapons. What June 8, 2026 represents is a new phase of that failure, one in which the international community is no longer even pretending that denuclearization is the goal. China has effectively accepted North Korea as a nuclear state. Russia openly endorses it. The United States is distracted by Iran. And Kim Jong Un, who started the year by visiting a weapons-grade nuclear manufacturing plant and vowing exponential expansion of his nuclear arsenal, received the leader of the world's second-largest economy on his territory and was told explicitly that China supports him unconditionally. The last time Xi visited Pyongyang was 2019. In those 7 years, North Korea went from having an estimated 40 nuclear warheads to an estimated 70. It developed intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching the continental United States. It deployed troops to Europe's active war zone. And it secured formal military alliances with both Russia and, now implicitly, China. The visit that just ended in Pyongyang did not solve any of this, but it told you exactly which direction the world is moving. She landed in Pyongyang. The flags were flying, the children waved, and the word denuclearization was never spoken. My name is James Landon. If this gave you a clearer framework for what you're watching unfold on the Korean Peninsula, share it with someone who needs to understand this. And I'll see you on the next one.